Hi friends, welcome back to what has now basically become an exclusively Wheel of Time YouTube page, booktube page, whatever you want to call it, also known as Fantasy Awash. Today we are going to be talking about book 3 of the Eye of the World series by Robert Jordan, which is called The Dragon Reborn, and why The Dragon Reborn was a big disappointment. Let's jump in. So I finished this book yesterday, so I took a little bit of time to mull it over, think about it, and see if I really did feel this way. And yes, I do. I feel like this book is a major letdown from book 2, also book 1 in general. I just think that this isn't a very good book, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it. This video primarily is going to be a bit of a rant and not praising this series or this book. So if that's something that you find might personally offend you, if you love the Wheel of Time so much that you can't hear any criticisms about it, this might not be the right video for you. If you are keeping track of my journey, I have tried to read this series a couple of times. I started initially with The Eye of the World 2 times and then put it down for many years, picked it up for the 3rd time this year, and it worked. I then subsequently immediately read The Great Hunt, which I really liked, even though I did think that it had flaws and issues, and then immediately jumped into The Dragon Reborn. Now, The Dragon Reborn for me, as this is the 3rd book in a series, this is going to be a spoiler-heavy discussion. If you are not interested in spoilers, I would suggest that you stop listening now. So despite this book being called The Dragon Reborn, there is very little of The Dragon Reborn actually in this book. Rand is barely in this book, and I wouldn't even necessarily call him a side character. He's just kind of there occasionally, and I didn't love this because we see that Rand is already starting to seep into his insanity a little bit, and the backstory that we've been given is that the more that you touch the source as a man, the more insane that you become. Now, one of the things I found very interesting in book 2 is that basically you realize that when you are a man that can channel, it's almost like in our modern world being given an Alzheimer's diagnosis, in the sense that you know this terrible thing is coming. Every man who can channel knows insanity is coming. It's how long you can fight it off for. Similarly to an Alzheimer's diagnosis, in the sense that you know this terrible thing awaits you, how long can you fight it off for that's happening in your mind. So I liked that approach to the story. However, from book 2 to book 3, there's this massive jump, it feels like, in terms of how quickly Rand is just falling into that level of insanity. He's now paranoid all the time. He's not trusting anybody. And the reader, me in this sense, I'm sitting here thinking, this is really quick. I also know that this book series is 1,000,000 books long, and he's going to be insane this quickly for how long? This just doesn't really make sense. And we know that Rand's not really going to go off and kill himself, because it seems like there's a bit of suicide ideation in the story that's happening. He doesn't really want to live anymore. He would like to kind of off himself, but you know that he is the hero on the hero's journey, so he's going to be there until the end. Like, that's not a surprise. That is how the hero's journey works. So I didn't love this aspect to the story. I also didn't really like a lot of the things that we'll get into it. Let's get into it. I'm then also going to talk about the characters, I feel like, before I talk more about plot, but Perrin in this book for me just wasn't interesting. And I find this to be a really big bummer, because in Eye of the World, of the 3 main boys, Mat, Perrin, and Rand, I was most interested in Perrin's storyline. I thought it was the most fascinating. I liked the wolves. I really liked Elias, and I liked how they were developing that storyline. We basically got nothing of it in book 2. And now in book 3, we do get almost exclusively Perrin, because Rand is nowhere to be found. And it's too much of Perrin and too little of substance. There's no mentorship that's happening for Perrin in this book. Elias isn't anywhere near him. He is seeing Hopper in this dream world and dream space, which the dream space is something we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes. But there's no guidance for Perrin. Moraine has absolutely no idea really what's going on with him, how to explain this to him. So he's kind of just floundering and has no idea how to interact, it feels like, with other people. From the first book, when he's with Egwene, we see that he has this unrequited love for Egwene that we know isn't going to happen, because there's this long-standing thing between her and Rand. Fine. But Perrin isn't a moron, and I feel like the way he talks to women, he just doesn't know what's going on ever. In this book, he feels like Min might have a thing for him, so he tells her that he likes her, but as a friend or a sister, and she is completely dumbfounded by this because she in no way has feelings for Perrin, despite the fact that Perrin may be thinking that she now does. And then later in the story, there is a presumed love interest that is brought in for Perrin Fail, and that dynamic is terrible. It is that trope of he picks on you because he likes you, or she picks on you because she likes you. It's just stupid. I'm sorry. Like, this relationship isn't great. I don't like how it was introduced. I don't like the banter between the two of them. I just don't think that it is a good thing, and I don't feel that it adds anything at this point to the story. The one male character that I was happy with their plot line in this story is Matt. We see that Matt is finally severed from his ties to the dagger, which is interesting, and Matt kind of resumes that more eye of the world prior to Shattered Logoth Matt personality, in that he's feisty, he's immature, but he's fun-loving and he's caring. These are the characteristics that were completely lacking from Matt in the latter half of Eye of the World and were completely absent in book 2. In book 2, we see that he basically becomes a shell of himself and just overtly jealous of Rand and the fact that Rand is this elevated person now and he's not, and oh Lord, and things like that. It didn't look good for the Matt character, and from most people that I've spoken to, Matt is the predominantly favorite character of the Wheel of Time, and I could see that coming into play more so near the end of this book. So that was interesting to me, and I was happy to see this just because I found that the plotline with Matt up until this point wasn't overtly interesting or pulling me in. But there were still some issues with the Matt storyline, and that is that we now have what is seemingly Matt's gift or Matt's ability, and that's luck. Bringing luck into a story is such a cop-out in my opinion, because you can now put him in all of these different scenarios and the answer is just, well, he's lucky. So therefore we don't really have to worry about a solution that's complicated or well thought out. It's the fact that he's lucky, so he gets to live, or he's lucky and he makes a bet and therefore is able to defeat these two princes. And that's not to say that Matt didn't have arms training by his father. I know his father is supposed to be very good at that, but Matt makes a wager, I suppose, and therefore because he's made a wager and luck is involved in wagering, he's therefore able to beat the two princes at a sword fight and is then able to win dice and win gold and get out of dicey situations. Thought you might like that one. Just, it compromises your story and the integrity to your story because you are giving them an easy out for so many different scenarios, especially with depending on who you pair up Matt with. And I will say in this book, I loved that Matt was paired up with Tom. Tom is probably my favorite character from the first 3 books. He offers, I think, the most, even though he's not in them fully. I like his character. He feels like a fleshed out character, all the while staying mysterious. He's been involved with several of the characters as well. He's been involved with Matt and Rand. He's been involved with the girls. He has a thing with Moraine, Morghese. There's just a lot to the Tom character, and I appreciate that he is becoming more and more fleshed out in our story. Now I want to talk about the girls. If you've watched my last video, you know that I feel the relationships and the character work are where Jordan suffers the most in his storytelling, and that was brought to the front in this story with Elaine, Egwene, and Nynaeve. The 3 of them in the previous book were like buddy-buddy best friends, and in this book they are bickering nonstop, and it's not fun to read. Their storyline is also highly unbelievable to me, but we'll get to that in a minute. The bickering between the 3 of them, Nynaeve is a bully. Nynaeve is a bully. And at this point, her terrible behavior is now justified by the fact that Robert Jordan says she can use the one power when she's really angry. So it's good to get Nynaeve angry so she can channel. That to me is just lazy writing. I'm sorry. Give her depth, give her purpose, make it that she can channel when she's fighting for a cause, not just that she's angry all the time. And not only is she angry, but she's taking it out on the people closest to her. She's also putting Matt in that crossfire, despite the fact that Matt has gone out of his way to help them in this book. So all of these reasons just further amplify the fact that Nynaeve is not a good character. I know that everyone says in the later books she becomes this really foundational character and she's super great. Some people like Nynaeve from the beginning. I cannot get on board with this. It just doesn't make sense to me. But the relationship that I feel suffers the most in this book is Elaine and Egwene. We see in the first two books, especially in The Great Hunt, that Elaine is also interested in Rand, and despite these two having a friendship, it kind of feels that there's this underlying tension because the two of them picture themselves with Rand. In this book, we've kind of skipped over the fact in some cases that Egwene is likely suffering from major PTSD, and there's just bickering between these three girls, so much so that Elaine slaps Egwene at some point in this book. This just doesn't seem like something enjoyable that I want to be a part of. Like, I kept looking at how long these parts were going to be with the girls because I wanted to move on to the next chapter, to a different part of the story. The last character that I want to talk about is Moraine, but that's going to be more heavily involved in the plot. So at this point, we're going to transition and start speaking about the plot of this book. The plot in this book at times makes sense, and most of the time makes very little sense. The plot to me that makes the least amount of sense is the plot line that involves the Black Aja, Nynaeve, Elaine, and Egwene. You have three girls who aren't full Aes Sedai. The Amyrlin Seat, who says Black Aja haven't been seen for at least 1,000 years, if not longer, and you're going to take three non-Aes Sedai and send them to track the Black Aja? Why? This makes zero sense. Black Aja are fully trained Aes Sedai and also then have abilities that the Dark One has given them, so are even more powerful, we can assume, than just your regular Aes Sedai, and you're sending people that can't even fully channel to go after them. This plot line to me made absolutely no sense. The Amyrlin Steed is supposed to be the top Aes Sedai, the smartest one, and yet this is what she's doing. Unless we find out that the Amyrlin Seat is a Black Aja later in the story, which that would be really boring, and sends them off as like essentially bait, whatever. This just wasn't appealing to me whatsoever. Did not like this storyline. The other major issue for me in this book is so much of this book takes place in this dream world, and I assume it's the same dream world that Perrin is visiting with Hopper, that the girls are able to also traverse and go through. I found that there was just too much time in this book devoted to the dream world, and I understand that dreams are important. We've talked about dreamers in the first two books, and I assume that that is going to carry forward significantly, but Perrin is basically losing himself in these dreams, and then we also see at the end of the book how Fahil is then like stuck in a dream space and stuck in the dream world, so we're now pulling another character into this dream world. It's just too much. We also then see a new Forsaken that comes out in this story. This is now becoming rather formulaic. In the first two books, we have the build of our plot. At the end of the story, Rand faces off against a Forsaken. The Forsaken die. Rand moves on to the next thing. In the first book, we see the death of two Forsaken. Rand also then thinks that he's killed the Dark One. At the end of book 2, The Great Hunt, Rand thinks he's killed the Dark One. And in book 3, we have Balal, who is our Forsaken in this one. He is also in this dream world with Rand, and he is then destroyed at the end of this book. And Rand also thinks that he's killed the Dark One once again. This is way too repetitive, it's too formulaic, and it's not really advancing the plot any. In this case, we understand now that there's a body that's been left behind, and Moraine finally comes to the realization that the Dark One isn't Balzaman, that's probably Ishmael. I 100% am not convinced that the body that is left behind at the end of this story belongs to Balzaman or Ishmael. I think it was probably Bilal's body, because of the fact that there has been so much tension between Ishmael and Rand, the fact that he keeps calling him Luz Theron, and he reinstates the fact over and over again that they've been fighting with each other for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. And that's not just going to end like that. It's really anticlimactic. I see this probably going on till the end of the series, so that again is kind of lackluster for me in that sense that nothing really is resolved. And we then have this Arthurian story element that's brought into this one, where Rand is searching for this sword, Kalandor, which feels very reminiscent to Excalibur in the Arthurian myth. Whoever can wield this sword is the Dragon Reborn, same as whoever can pull the sword from the stone is going to be our king, kind of thing. Rand pulls the sword, gets Kalandor, and at the end of the book proclaims himself the Dragon Reborn. We see that the people of the dragon are starting to come back out, which are the Aiel. The Aiel are probably the only interesting part of this book for me. I liked learning more about them, but there's not a ton else that really happens. We also need to revisit the fact that Moiraine somehow miraculously is able to kill a Forsaken, despite in the first book fighting off Trollocs and other minimal things in comparison to fighting a Forsaken, drains her of all of her energy, and she's sick for a lot of the book, but she can fight and kill a Forsaken, one of the most powerful beings to have ever existed. This to me just doesn't add up or make much sense. The last character that I'm going to mention, well, the last two, is Lan gets very little in this book. Basically no development, which is really a bummer because I really like the Lan character. I would like to see him get more lines than he did in this book. And the last character is Lanfear. Lanfear is barely in this book, which is a bummer because it seemed that in book 2, she was going to be this kind of mysterious character. We know that she's a Forsaken. We know that she's crazy strong. And now in this book, she comes across as a crazy ex-girlfriend, and that's basically it. Lews Therin is mine. And that's basically the extent of what we get of Lanfear, but we also get to see her very minimally in a dream sequence, because why not spend 75% of this book in a dream world? That was most of my problem with this book. The last thing that I'm going to discuss is the fact that I can see from this book why Sanderson was chosen to finish this series, because Sanderson, similarly to Robert Jordan in this book, builds, and then there's something called the Sanderlanche, where the last 100 to 150 pages, everything kind of happens, it gets thrown at the reader. That is exactly how Sanderson writes, and that is exactly what happened in this book. So it is not surprising to me that The Wheel of Time was foundational for Sanderson in that way, and his writing style really emulates that, and it makes sense that he would then go on to complete this series. I know that I have said a lot of things about this book that probably will not resonate with a lot of people, because most people are massive fans of The Wheel of Time. However, I really liked The Great Hunt. This book is a major letdown in comparison to that. I don't see why this book even really is necessary. I feel like you could have probably just jumped into the next book and maybe extended The Great Hunt a little bit and added some of these elements into it, or incorporated them maybe into the next book. I have been told by people in my close circle that books 4 and 5 are some of their absolute favorites, and this is from people that didn't really love the whole series of Wheel of Time, so I'm curious to see how I feel about them. I am going to be taking a few week break from reading the series. I'm geared up now with having read these 2 books to continue watching the show, which is going to be premiering on September 1st. If you are interested in following along with my watching the show journey, comparing it to the books, Christopher Navo and I are doing weekly chats where we are doing a rewatch of season 1 and comparing it to the books. And then for season 2, we will be doing weekly videos for that as well, to discuss how season 2 is different from books 2 and books 3, because that's supposed to be which books are being adapted for this upcoming season. Let me know in the comments below if you share any of my opinions where you differ from my opinions. I understand that my opinion is probably not the most common opinion about Wheel of Time, and that's fine. Be kind in your comments if you are going to have any. If you'd like to go back and rewatch our first 2 chats on episodes 1, 2, and 3 of the Wheel of Time, I will link those down below. If you would like to help support my channel, you can always hit like and subscribe. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram, you can find me at Fantasy Awash. As always, I will see you next time.